Live it up, live it up, live it up, live it up.
So welcome to the podcast. This is our second preseason episode. I'm not really sure what the word for that is. I've been saying preseason.
I think that's a good word.
It's like an introductory episode before we bother having any guests.
But yeah, this is the E9 podcast. It is our little version of an Enneagram podcast that we're excited to give to you. And what we're doing on this episode is giving you a whirlwind tour of the Enneagram. On most episodes, we will have guests who, as they tell their story, we will help them see the Enneagram within themselves and within their story. But we want our listeners to have an opportunity to understand the Enneagram better before we jumped into that. So
maybe you're listening to us without having listened to any other Enneagram podcasts. I don't know what kind of strange people you are if that's the case, but maybe you have. Maybe you're new to this, and we will be your first real introduction to the types and how the whole thing works, in which case, sorry, we'll do our best.
Yes, apologies are and will be in order. So, Steve, where should we start?
Well, we should probably start by giving an introduction to the whole thing.
The whole damn thing.
What is the Enneagram? Why do we have this weird line drawing and the numbers? Why are all of my friends posting that they're fours and that means something I'm supposed to understand?
Yeah.
On their Twitter feeds.
Yeah, maybe you found yourself listening to this just so you can understand what's going on Twitter. And if that's the case, we're glad we can help.
You're not alone.
No. So the Enneagram is, well, in one sense, it is a drawing, and we refer to that drawing as the Enneagram. If you're not sure what we're talking about, pull out your phone and type Enneagram into your search browser, and you'll see what I mean.
An Enneagram is a weird word, but it literally just means a drawing of 9.
Yeah, or a 9-pointed drawing.
Yeah, and so it's an awfully intimidating image and word for something that's really not so bad.
Some have said that it looks like 2 pentagrams having sex.
That's super weird.
That is super weird. And some people are actually put off by the drawing. They think it looks kind of evilish or satanic. And I've gotten those looks when I have an Enneagram book out in a public place and, someone wearing a skirt and a bonnet walk by and give me this look of disapproval.
You know how conservative I was when I was in high school. I probably would have thought that way.
I probably would have thought that way too.
Yeah.
So it's not evil, at least not in our opinion. So don't be scared of the drawing.
The reason why we're so interested in it is because we've recognized ourselves in it, and it's helped us understand the deeper part of ourselves better and come to terms with what it means to be us and how to be healthier versions of ourselves. And so I don't know in what world that would be evil. We're hoping that maybe it will have that effect for other people as well.
Absolutely. And the drawing is there just to help us remember certain relationships that take place between the numbers. And as we explain things about the Enneagram, that'll become more clear. So if you do want to Google up an image of the drawing, that might be useful as we go through this so that you do have some reference points.
As a line drawing, even though at first it's kind of off-putting, there's a certain kind of beauty in it because it's a symbol that at once suggests difference and connectedness between these things, right? That there's a fundamental unity. And there is something that keeps us sort of separated from each other. And perhaps we can find a way past those things through this.
Yeah. So with that, let's start by talking about, there are 9 different types, and what does each type represent? There's different ways to talk about each type. I think of them as 9 different ways of seeing the world. That's one way to talk about it, where each of us, as we look out into the world, we see different things. We edit different information in and out of our consciousness. We highlight different things. And I think that there is something to be said for the 9 types and there being 9 specific ways that we edit the world. And so as a 5, I edit the world differently. I edit reality differently than my wife, who is a 6, or one of my very good friends who's a 4. When we look out into the world, we're actually seeing different things, and our Enneagram type has to do with that.
And my pet language, because like you said, there are so many ways to talk about it, because my background is it's so social work heavy.
Yeah.
And trauma heavy, dealing with personal trauma. So I really love the way of talking about these types or energies as coping skills, essentially.
Yeah.
A way that we've responded to a dangerous and scary world.
Yeah.
A world where there is such thing as scarcity and violence and all that. And so we arrive into the world vulnerable and relatively innocent, and in response to the dangers that we perceive pretty early on, we artificially limit ourselves within the confines of these sets of behaviors that we use to kind of deal with it or protect ourselves.
And not even just behaviors.
Right.
They are external behaviors,
patterns.
but also ways of thinking, patterns of thought. Yeah.
And so one way to look at the image of the Enneagram really is the whole person. That a healthy, whole human being, at least in theory, should be able to engage any of these energies as they're needed.
Yeah.
But that, unfortunately, we have sort of limited ourselves to one or a small group of these energies, and they tend to limit our behaviors and limit our freedom rather than, we usually talk about personality as something good.
Yeah.
Like you are different and unique, and that's good.
Yeah.
And that's not wrong, but the whole Enneagram approach to personality is kind of through dysfunction, right?
Yeah.
Your personality is how you are limited. You're prevented from doing things outside your brand.
Yeah.
Right? You're not doing things off brand.
One of the first phrases that really struck me when I was learning more about the Enneagram from you, and this is something you got from someone else too, is you're not your personality. There is something essential behind your personality. Your personality is just the stance that you've taken in order to get by in the world.
And that's not bad.
No, it's not bad at all.
It's
gotten you this far.
And there's something kind of wonderful about how it's helped to construct you. The difficulty is that in the second half of life, that's a classic phrase. It doesn't mean like once you're 40 or something, but once you're past figuring out who you are, now you have the new task of figuring out how to be not limited by who you are.
Yeah.
How do you step outside the boundaries of who you've always been to meet new challenges?
Once you've differentiated yourself from everyone else and constructed an isolated identity, now it's time to now break out of that isolation and take that self that you've constructed back out into the world.
Right.
And allow it to interact with the world, with others, with nature, with everything around you. Break out of that shell that you've created and open back up. Yeah.
And even though you and I are both religious and spiritual people, and so we interpret the Enneagram very much in those terms,
Sure.
There's a sense in which it's accessible beyond the boundaries of our version of spirituality and our religious language, because that is part of the human task, right?
Yeah.
The Enneagram, even outside of its religious and spiritual overtones, it's supposed to be a tool that helps us engage the second half of life.
So, Steve, what are some other ways to think about the Enneagram? We've talked about how it's a way of seeing. It is a network of defensive coping mechanisms or a way of being in the world. What else?
Well, another way, and I don't hear this one as much, but I think it can be really helpful, especially when you start understanding how this system came to be, how we have this design, and how the lines in the line drawing are showing certain relationships. How did we discover this structure? And honestly, it reflects a certain anthropology. It reflects a certain understanding of what a human being is, what it's like to be a person. And even though too much can be made of this, there's sort of a head center and a heart center and a gut center.
Yeah.
And that's a convenient and very ancient way to talk about what it means to be human. That there are sort of three aspects to our inner world, and we tend to prefer one over the others. And that's sort of how you get your three major groups on the Enneagram. So your 8, 9, and 1 at the top, those are people who prefer the gut and sort of live out of that space, whether they recognize it or not.
Yeah, those
and then,
like core instincts.
Yeah.
The drives. Those are, gut people.
And they will tend to not be in their head or their heart quite as much.
Yeah.
They live in the world around them rather than in the world inside them.
Yes.
For the most part.
They say that those types, they feel as if the world is coming at them like a wave. And that kind of forces them to create some kind of defensive stance against that, where like reality is just coming at them like a wave, those 8, 9s, and 1s. And there's 3 different reactions against that, and we'll talk about that as we get there.
And then you've got your head center, and we're both there.
Yep.
We're the extreme end of the head center. Sorry for all of those listening to us. We like to think that we're moving toward health in the head center, so maybe we're not so bad. But
hopefully.
Boy, you should hear a podcast from us about 10 or 15 years ago. Anyway.
I don't want to hear that podcast.
No. But you have it's on the left side of the diagram there. You've got your 5, 6, and 7. They're all the head types. We're the ones who, in response to the world, we sort of prefer engaging things through our head, and so consequently we'll tend to get stuck there. We tend to be the ones who are least in touch with our heart, etc. Whether that is apparent through our behavior or not, whether we're conscious of it ourselves or not. And then on the opposite side of the circle, you've got your 2, 3, and 4, and they are the heart center. They're the people who prefer the heart in a similar way to the way those of us in head center prefer our head. And so they'll tend to get stuck in their heart, so to speak. That's not a phrase we use much, but get stuck in your heart is just as real a phenomenon as get stuck in your head. And so on the extreme end of that, you have your 4s, and there are interesting parallels between what it means to be a 4 and a 5, because 5s are this extreme head version and 4s are this extreme heart version. And so we kind of mirror each other in a way. Yeah, we're very different.
In the way that if you look in a mirror and you raise your left hand, it looks like the mirror is raising their right. Like there's,
exactly.
It's like we mirror each other in ways that are opposite.
Well, we've talked about this a lot. Our good friend who is a 4, and he and I have so many similar but seemingly polar opposite life patterns.
Yeah.
And we will interpret situations in exactly the opposite way.
Yeah.
And have exactly opposite reactions to the same phenomenon. And it is fascinating and frustrating.
And if you look at the Enneagram diagram, it is interesting because there is a circle there, but if you look at the other weird drawings within the circle, there is a break there. In fact, it looks almost like a horseshoe where it goes up one side and down the other. And so while 4 and 5 are very close together, in another way, they are the farthest apart.
Yes, there's the biggest gap there.
Yeah. And so that's why as we walk through each type and give you some sense of what each type is like, we're actually going to start with the 5 because that's the one that we know the best. And I think it's worth having you hear us talk about our own type and hear us the way we talk about our type, because we tend to be very self-deprecating, and there's a point to that. And we want you to hear us talk about ourselves in a self-deprecating way before we talk about whatever type you are in an equally self-deprecating or an equally deprecating way. It's no longer
because
self-deprecating.
We do have to reveal the dysfunction.
Yeah.
That's part of the thing. And so we have to be honest about what ours are, and especially since that's the place from which we're going to be approaching all the other numbers as we go around.
Absolutely. So we're going to start with the 5 and work our way around to the 4. And hopefully you will, as we do that, you'll be able to see kind of the movement from one extreme to another.
first recognized that you're a 5? When you had the aha moment? Because you and I both have noticed that's a very promising moment when you're working with someone and they suddenly recognize themselves in the Enneagram, because it's usually very painful.
Yeah, I don't remember it exactly because, as is common for 4s and 5s, I was actually stuck between those numbers for a little bit, and I was trying to figure out, am I a 5, am I a 4, and I could see some of the patterns of each. But I do remember it being in conversation with you in the living room of my old house, and I think it probably wasn't as significant because I was approaching it so much like a 5. And in realizing I was a 5, at least in that immediate moment, my feelings were not involved.
Yeah.
And so I took it as a very intellectual kind of, given all of the data that I've been able to receive, I've interpreted it, and I've come to the conclusion that I am a 5. Now, after you left, at some point when I came back around to think about it by myself, I probably then felt, oh my goodness, I am such a 5. Oh, unbelievable. Because this is something that 5s will do, is we tend not to feel in the moment, but then once we're alone and quote unquote safe
in our castle,
we'll allow our emotions to come out. But we kind of, typically we rarely feel with others around. We will just think and process.
And sometimes we've learned to behave as if we're feeling emotions in the moment because it makes things easier for the people around us.
They need that emotional input from us.
Exactly. Like, I know this is what I'm supposed to be feeling. Now, in about an hour or two, I'm actually going to be feeling these things, and I'm going to have to process it on my own. But in the moment, I just have to get through this situation, and the people around me are depending on me to be a real person. So I'm going to pretend that I am.
I'm going to pretend that I'm a real person in the way that they expect a real person to act.
Exactly. But, it's 5s and 4s, because we're at this extreme end. We tend to be some of the first people to recognize that something isn't quite right with us. We make a lot of that feeling that whatever it is that other people have, we're lacking. We tend to make a lot of that feeling and lean into it. And so obviously I'm being self-deprecating in the sense of pretending to be human, but that's, if you are a 4 or a 5, that's probably something you'll relate to.
Yeah. I think every 5 I've talked to, when I say, 5s typically have this sense of that they're not right somehow. There's something broken about them. The way I've expressed this before is, I feel like a broken toy, or I feel like I'm Pinocchio hoping to become a real boy someday. Like, there's different ways that I've expressed that. And 5s and 4s just have that sense about them somehow, that they're just not quite right. There's something wrong with them. And they can't always say how. It's oftentimes very ambiguous. I mean, even with us, it's showing up in how many times we've apologized already in this and the previous episode, hasn't it?
Yeah. Sorry for all the apologies.
So we're already assuming that, we're just not up to this task. Oh my God, there's no way this is gonna be good. No, I think this is actually gonna be good, but I still find myself apologize for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not sure if I've told you this or not. I'm sure I probably have over the years. The moment when I realized for sure that I am a 5, honestly, I had been exploring the Enneagram for at least a year by the time I was finally convinced it was legitimate. I was very suspicious of it.
I went through that period as well, yeah.
I thought it was kind of nonsense. And so I tend to think, I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but I tend to think that understanding and accepting the Enneagram tends to coincide very closely with recognizing yourself in it.
Yeah.
That those things go hand in hand. And so as opposed to like other certain personality typologies where you can kind of explain the system or show them someone who they are in it and then explain the system, you can do one or the other first. With the Enneagram, it's so difficult. If someone gives you like, I've got 3 minutes, tell me why I should care about this. I can't really do that because you kind of have to submit to the process and find yourself in it, and then you'll understand the system.
Yeah, almost if someone forced me to do that, I think what I'd do is I'd say, well, here's what it's done for me, and here's my story of the Enneagram, because I can't just tell you about the Enneagram,
and I certainly can't tell you what your type is.
Yeah,
you've got to tell me, and so in order for you to tell me, I've got to walk you through the whole thing.
Yeah,
which is why we're doing a podcast, right?
Yeah, and almost any time I've ever spent time typing someone, you almost have to keep saying, now just be patient. We're going somewhere. There is something to this. I promise. Just have a little faith in me, and we'll get there.
And you'll know it when it happens, and I'll know it by the look on your face.
Yeah.
So, strangely enough, that moment for me, I had started to settle into maybe I'm a 5, but I'm not sure. It clicked when the very knowledgeable person walking me through this was just sharing anecdotes.
Mm-hmm.
And they also had this interesting pattern of talking about how the different types relate to their body.
Oh, yeah.
And I found that very enlightening, and I wish I had taken better notes, but I was just so absorbed in the moment. This person said that 5s can have a broken arm or leg, they can be physically ill, and just keep going through their day as if it doesn't matter so much. But as soon as something is wrong with their head, if they have a headache or an earache or a toothache, or as soon as something is wrong with their head, they feel like they're not a person anymore. It's so disruptive to everything that they can't really function. But in the rest of their body, they don't care. Because whereas other types, if you were to ask in theory, how does that person relate to their body, you could find all these different relationships. But a 5 would answer, what body? Right? Like, I tend to forget that I'm here. I'm limited by this thing. I don't just inhabit this thing. This is who I am. And that was so, first of all, I hadn't recognized that consciously in myself. But as soon as I did recognize it, and I realized that other people could recognize that in me as well, that's a common pattern for some people, I felt so recognized and so ridiculous in the exact same moment.
I think another way to speak about the Enneagram would almost be, it's the thing that reveals all the ways in which we are so damn ridiculous.
Yep.
I think that's actually a very useful way to think about the Enneagram.
Yeah.
It makes you feel totally ridiculous, but in such an enlightening way. And if you're with a teacher of the Enneagram who's actually knows what they're doing and is good at it, you will feel ridiculous and at the same time accepted.
Yes.
And that's to me something that's very beautiful about the Enneagram is I'm learning both to see how ridiculous and dysfunctional I am, and at the same time I feel accepted.
Mm-hmm. That's part of the sacredness of this thing we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Where we're holding other people's stories as they're offered to us, and really holding the people themselves in a way. And so much respect and care has to be practiced in that moment. The worst thing we could do then is treat the Enneagram like this parlor trick where we can discover things about this person that they didn't even recognize themselves or whatever, like we're goofy magicians or something. The fact is, we're dealing with real people with real life struggles, and anytime we're engaging in this level of depth, there's something really heavy and something deserving of honor, right? And at the same time, it's also just so silly. But it's silly in the sense that, Seth, when our guests come on the show, they aren't going to be silly in front of us. We're all going to be silly together.
Yeah.
Because it's the shared silliness of what it means to be a person.
Yeah.
And that's what's so humbling and beautiful about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've talked a lot about
the 5.
Us being a 5, but
let's start talking about maybe the 5 in a more
how does the 5 actually
systematic
work?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to talk about is how does a 5 see the world? Do you want to start with that?
5s see the world in large part through how much anything is going to cost them energy. Everything about what I might be doing throughout the day or where I might be going or who I might be running into. Without it being a conscious thing, I am evaluating how much energy those things are going to cost me, and I am divvying my energy up as carefully as possible because I know that if I run, I have a finite amount, and if I run to the end of that energy, I am a very, very bad version of myself, and I do damage to the people around me.
Yeah.
And so I am miserly, but I overreact, especially if I'm unhealthy. I will want to go through my day without giving any energy to anything.
Yeah.
And that's very problematic.
So if you, or maybe you have a friend who is hesitant to participate in things, and you don't know why, they just always seem like, hey, do you want to go out with us on this thing? Well, no, I don't really. If they're always turning you down, it's very possible they're a 5. When a 5 wakes up in the morning, they feel like they have half a tank of gas compared to everybody else. And they have to be so careful with what they spend that energy on because they have a fundamental fear of running out. In fact, that's basically what the fundamental fear is of the 5, is that there's not enough of me to go around. I'm not capable enough. I'm not competent enough. There's just not enough of me.
Yeah.
And so I have to be very careful with what I give myself towards.
And so we do goofy things like if I'm grocery shopping and I see someone turn into the aisle in front of me and I know that person, I might love them. They might be one of my favorite people in the world, and I will avoid them at all costs.
You wait until they're done in that aisle before you then go. And now you are actually hyper aware of that person's presence in the store. And every time you're about to go down an aisle, you will check, you'll peek around the corner first to make sure they're not there. And it's not that you don't love them, you do love them, but every single, for a 5, every single hello, every single handshake, every interaction with someone costs something.
I am never more exhausted at the end of the day than when someone has been too demanding on my personal energy.
Yeah.
If they've been in my space too long, or if they've wanted me to pay attention to whatever they're talking about for too long.
Yeah.
Those are the things that will drain me the fastest and the deepest.
And especially if you don't know that it's coming.
Yes.
5s love to know when things are coming because then we can plan. We have different strategies for how to save our energy. But if something is kind of sprung on us and we didn't know it was coming, we don't have time to set up those strategies. We're just kind of stuck there, and we can feel the energy leaking out of us towards this other person.
And so it's very common for 5s to, well, like you mentioned, strategies and things like that, but we also tend to have a safe place.
Yeah.
And that can be a literal or metaphorical safe place, though it's hard to have a metaphorical safe place if you don't have a physical one.
Yeah.
But we tend to have these ways of sequestering ourselves off from everything else. If we're at a party, we will find the corner. We will hide.
In fact, they say that 5s, and I think that I've done this, like a 5 can show up to a party, and if they for some reason felt like they had some obligation to go to this party, because I'm not sure they'll go otherwise. And they can just withdraw all of their energy and just find a way to blend into the surroundings. 5s actually tend to have strategies to camouflage themselves in different situations. But we can just withdraw all of our energy, and people will walk around and say, like they could walk right by me and go, "Where's Seth? I thought he said he was going to be here." And I could be right there. And they just we just have this way of just camouflaging ourselves. We're putting no energy out into the room. We're withholding everything, and we just go unnoticed.
I first discovered that in myself when I realized I used to try to walk through the house without making any sound whatsoever.
Oh, really?
So that people wouldn't know where I am at, so that I couldn't be traced.
Like as a kid?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I used to try to just slip around and not be heard, not be noticed, not be felt. Because the floor in the house I grew up in was very kind of creaky and noisy, right?
Yeah.
So I knew exactly how to get through the house without making noise. And that's weird.
Let me give you an example that most likely needs to be edited out.
Okay.
I realized sometime last year that my whole life, when I would use the restroom, I would pee onto the porcelain, not into the water.
Yes.
Because, do you do that too?
Yes.
Because the water makes too much noise.
Yes.
And somewhere as a kid, I learned to feel like I wasn't allowed to make that much noise. I wasn't allowed to have too much of a footprint on the world, including noise making. It was just too much.
There's this perennial feeling that other people feel as low on energy as I do. Mm-hmm. And that if I make too much of a demand on anyone else's energy, then they might cut me off at some point. I might become too costly to them, and they would give up on me. Mm-hmm. And they may have done nothing to deserve that. That's me projecting my own psychology onto the people around me.
So hopefully you're seeing how fives tend to isolate. I don't want you sucking my energy. I don't want to suck your energy. So I'm just going to sequester myself and live kind of a life over here where I am physically sequestered, I am emotionally quarantined, I am by myself. That's the way fives tend to just live.
And so consequently, we often spend our lives preparing to finally do something and potentially never actually doing it at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is the other thing about the five is not only are we hyper aware of energy costs, but everything to us seems to be a form of data to be analyzed. And so everything is an intellectual game. We collect data like crazy. And so we build these internal worlds and systems in our mind, and we want the outer world to conform to our inner world. But it rarely does. And so we tend to just stay within our own inner world, which means thinking a lot, but rarely ever doing anything. I don't know if you, the listener, understands how insane it is that two fives are doing a podcast right now. In fact, we've joked about this a lot, how we're actually going to do this. Like, we've talked about it a lot, and now we're doing it, and it's like,
but
it's kind of a little crazy, and it's a wonderful and beautiful step for us.
Though on one hand, we're doing something, also, we're totally doing a podcast, which is one of the most isolated things we could possibly do. It's a step.
Yeah.
Maybe
absolutely.
Eventually we'll actually work in front of people or whatever. Who knows?
Yeah, that's true. That is true. In essence, we are just talking to each other with microphones in front of us.
Yeah. It's just a high-tech version of what we do anyway.
It's up to you, the listener, to make this into something real.
Without listeners,
I hope you realize the pressure that we're putting on you, and that you don't hate us for it. See, there I am. I'm worried that I'm actually imposing upon our listeners.
So yeah,
that's terrible.
Tell your friends how awesome this podcast is. Save us from ourselves,
so that we can become a real boy someday. You're listening to two Pinocchios hoping to become a real boy someday.
So, do we have more important things to say about a five, or should we finally move on?
I think it's time to move on.
Okay, let's talk about the six.
Yeah, the six. So the six, when they venture out into the world, what they see is the potential for danger everywhere. Let me give you an illustration. I was at a birthday party with my family, and my youngest son, who was 4 at the time, was across the room at the cake table. This is a church fellowship hall, so it's a very large room, and he's across the room at the cake table, and I wasn't aware of this. I felt like it was a safe enough place that I didn't really need to worry about where my kids were. I knew that there were plenty of people around who, if something happened, they would be taken care of. But someone was handing my 4-year-old son a plate with a piece of cake on it, and my wife, who was standing next to me, breaks from our conversation and goes, "Oh my gosh, all I can see is cake all over the floor. I'll be right back." And she walks briskly across the room to make sure that my son does not drop his plate of cake all over the floor. Now notice what she said. She didn't say, "Ooh, I'm worried he might drop it." She said, "All I can see is cake all over the floor." This potential danger, which wasn't even a huge danger, no real harm in cake being dropped on the floor, but it is a potential danger, and it becomes all she can see. It edits out every other reality. It's all she can see. That's the life of a six.
It's hard to find a better phrase for consumed by, but it's as though what could go wrong is the glasses through which they see the whole world.
Yeah.
They see everything in terms of what could go wrong. It's the water that they're swimming. They're swimming, they're getting through life, but they're always swimming through what could go wrong, which plays into their superpower, really, because sixes are amazing troubleshooters.
Oh, yeah.
If you're working on a project and you need to make sure that you've accounted for everything that could go wrong, you need to have a six on your team, because if they're personally invested in this project, they will poke every hole they possibly can in it, and it can feel frustrating, except they're doing that because they want to make sure this thing floats, because they don't want to be personally invested in something that's going to go wrong.
Yeah, in fact, they say that sixes are probably 50% of the population. And there's a lot to be made of that, but just about every Enneagram expert I've ever heard speak on it agrees that sixes are about 50% of the population, and they are the glue that holds everything together. I mean, a fun game to play would be, as we go around the circle, try and imagine if any of the other Enneagram types were 50% of the population and what that society would look like. All of them would be scary, I think, except for sixes. Yeah. Sixes hold everything together. We're all in a much better place because we have so many sixes around us.
And yet, if you wonder why maybe we as a society are slow to make an adjustment that you find important, or we're slow to embrace a new thing or change our mind about something, well, about half of us at least are really waiting to see if this thing is the right decision before they sign on.
Or if you wonder why fear-based techniques,
propaganda,
in any manner of media are so effective. Well, 50% of the population is sixes, and they respond to that fear-based technique.
They are so attuned to the things that go wrong that you can play upon that very easily.
They are very exploited in that way. It's almost, I find it kind of disgusting. But
all the more important for sixes to understand who they are, where that fear comes from, how they cope with it, and how to not be controlled by it, but to navigate it better, so they tend to be less victimized by people who know they can use fear to manipulate people.
Yeah. Another thing about the six, though, we will talk about subtypes later, but it's worth talking about. There are the sixes who are fearful and react in what is a very typical fearful way. They avoid things. They seek protection. There is another kind of six that's called the Counter Phobic. The first kind is called the phobic. The other kind is called the Counter Phobic, where they actually seek out the danger. And so if you're thinking about reactions to fear, these are the ones who, instead of flight, they fight. And it's almost as if they are interested in proving that they're not afraid. But that's still a fear-based reaction. And so these are sixes who oftentimes become like thrill seekers and in an attempt to prove that they're not fearful.
More likely to engage in riskier behaviors and things like that. And people marvel at how brave they seem to be. And the people themselves, the sixes themselves, if they're that type, tend to not be aware that it's fear driving this.
Yeah.
Why are they drawn to these experiences? Well, it's because they're afraid of them.
Yeah, and it can seem like courage, but
rather than hiding, they fight it.
Yeah. I would say that where it may seem like courage, it often seems like foolhardiness.
Yeah.
So I think that's worth noting about the six. Then on to the seven.
Sevens are interesting to me because, I mean, I mentioned the centers earlier, right? The head center, heart center, gut center. Well, one of the reasons why you have three types in each center is because you've got one type that really lives into that place and embodies it.
Like the five.
The five is the headiest of the head types.
Super heady.
And then you've got a type that is kind of in reaction to it, kind of trying to distance themselves from it. And in the head center, that's the seven. Sevens don't seem like they're people who are very heady. They seem like they're very fun people. And they are. That's the thing. They're very fun people. They're people who pursue happiness and want to not get stuck in their thinking so much.
Yeah, so where fives are heady in a way that keeps us from interacting with the world, Sevens are the opposite. They are always interacting with the world. They're ready to get out there and they're ready to experience. In fact, that's all they ever want to do.
Because in part, that's driven by an attempt to not do the head thing the way the fives do.
Yeah.
They're trying to avoid thinking about the heavy stuff, the dark stuff, more negative emotions. Sevens would rather not spend their short lives doing all those unpleasant things.
Yeah.
And they can be so powerful in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they also need some grounding.
Yeah. So the way that the headiness of the seven works, and oftentimes unbeknownst to them, is they are constantly making plans. If you want to have a fun time,
Mm-hmm.
a seven already has a plan for a fun time.
The thing I always say for sevens is we have this cliche that money can't buy happiness. And sevens know for a fact that is wrong
Yeah.
because they know exactly how they can spend $20 and have a good time with everybody this evening.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And so they constantly have at least one plan, and typically a plan B in case plan A doesn't work out. Because they don't even want to be locked into their own plan for happiness. There's another thing about sevens is they don't like to be overly committed to anything, because commitment resembles a lack of freedom to them. And so they love their freedom. And so they will, in fact, I know a seven who, I was talking with her just recently. She said that she had these plans to go down to Indianapolis with a friend. And she said, yeah, but I kind of flaked out on them. And I said, an hour-long car ride was too much of a commitment for you, wasn't it? And she said, yeah, it was. I couldn't, this time I couldn't take the hour-long car ride being stuck in there with
Mm-hmm.
another person. And that was just too much of a commitment. They were going to go and have fun, but the commitment of an hour car ride was too much for her to go and have fun.
It's a commitment thing, but I think it's maybe an energy. It's related
Mm-hmm.
at least to the way fives do commitment, because
Yeah.
sometimes fives can have a hard time with commitment,
Sure.
not because we don't want to commit, but because I don't know even 2 days from now where my energy is going to be at,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
what's going to be demanding my energy that day, and so I want to say yes, but also I don't know for sure that I'm going to have what it takes to do that thing that day.
Mm-hmm.
I probably do. It's probably going to be fine, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't
And that's
know.
what I'm paranoid about. And so fives will often tend to avoid commitment, whereas sevens, they're actually more likely to say, yeah. And then the day of,
Say,
I don't know.
No, I changed my mind. Yeah.
That's not going to be nearly as fun as I thought it would be. Like now that I'm close to it, like
I've found something that would be more fun, so
Yeah.
I'm going to do that instead.
and that sounds super flighty. It sounds like we're making light of it, except it's very similar to five's energy thing.
Yeah,
For a seven,
yeah.
they need to maintain a certain kind of fun level, a certain level of happiness
Uh-huh.
to be who they are, just like we need to maintain a certain amount of personal energy.
Yeah.
And so it actually is a really useful coping skill. It's just that it also can really trip them up in life.
They have a desperate need to avoid pain.
Yeah.
That's what drives them.
Yeah.
Is they need to avoid pain. And that's
And-
kind of at the heart of all of their behavior.
And some of us can benefit from that so much because, when I had hard times back in college, I'd always go to our friend Ben, who is about as seven as a person can be.
Mm-hmm.
If you really need to get away from the hard stuff for a few minutes and just be okay and have fun, you go to your seven friend. Because your seven friend isn't going to want to be in that space with you anyway. They're
Yeah.
going to draw you into their fun space.
They're going to draw you into their fun space.
Yeah.
In fact, what will typically happen is sevens are so full of energy. They're so fun to be around. You, I mean, these are your friends who, I mean, even just being in their presence, you instantly feel better about things. But if you do get a seven and you kind of force them into a place that they don't want to be, what you'll see happen is they will deflate. They withdraw all of their energy. They're not putting that sense of fun out into the room anymore. They suck it back, and all of a sudden, all the energy in the room is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're just kind of like, oh well, this is no fun anymore. Yeah.
Because what you're seeing there is a seven kind of turned into a five.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into those patterns a little later. But yeah, we start to morph into each other when we're at our worst or when we're at our best.
Yeah.
So that's the head center. Are we ready for the gut center?
We are as ready as we possibly could be.
Let's do
Gut
it.
center.
Because next up is 8, and 8s are a force to be reckoned with.
They are the bulldozer.
One of the people who introduced me to the Enneagram and really sold it to me is an 8, and she's this short, elderly woman who is an 8, and she describes herself as a rhinoceros, and it is absolutely appropriate.
Yeah.
She's one of the most intense people I've ever met.
Yeah.
8s make their presence known in the world.
8s are very intense people. I've heard it said that it's almost like this person should have intro music when they walk into a room.
Ba-ba-da-ba.
So they have, again, very intense energy. It's different from 7 energy. 7 energy is fun energy. 8 energy is
It's somewhat
heavier.
imposing.
Yeah, and imposing. Anytime I have to have a phone conversation with an 8, which I did the other day. When I hung up the phone, I realized that my breath was shallow.
Yeah.
Like I was nervous. So when I hung up, I was kind of like, why am I a little out of breath? Like all I did was have a phone conversation. Whenever I have to sit down with an 8, I'm a little nervous.
8s have this innate sense of how they can impose themselves on the world. And they have a sense, regardless of how correct they are in it, which is why introspection is often a weakness for the 8, but also so powerful, because they have to really step back and make sure that what they're imposing on the world is actually good for the world and not just their own thing.
Because they have a very strong sense of justice, but it's their own justice.
It's their own justice.
They have a very strong sense of truth, but oftentimes it's just truth is the way they see it.
Yes. The fact that it may be incorrect does not slow them down at all in imposing it on the world.
It's just the way it is.
And if you don't like it, then you need to change because I'm going to impose it anyway.
Yeah, it's a bulldozer.
Yeah. Which means that if you have an 8 on your team, you'll probably win even if you shouldn't. Also, if you have an 8 on the cause that actually is just, they're going to be one of your best allies.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But if you're opposing an 8, no matter how wrong they are, you're in trouble. They're such powerful people. And so, we mentioned earlier that 5s and 4s are often the first to recognize that, hey, maybe something's wrong with us. I need to try to figure this out before I can really get on with my life. That is the opposite for 8s.
8s are one of the last to recognize that there's anything wrong.
It usually takes something very significant in their life, kind of stopping them from doing their bulldozer thing.
Yeah.
They almost have to be immobilized before they can recognize that this pattern isn't going to work for them anymore.
And I think part of the reason for that is they are trying to avoid vulnerability.
Yes.
That's what they are afraid of. I don't think we really covered it, especially with the 5, but each type has a core fear. And for 8s, that's vulnerability. 5s and 4s know that they're vulnerable. 6s too, because they see all the dangers everywhere. 8s, they are trying to avoid that vulnerability. They don't want to recognize that they are vulnerable in any way. They believe that they are big enough to conquer whatever comes at them.
Yes.
And oftentimes they're wrong, but they believe it wholeheartedly enough that it's not until something conquers them that they start to realize, oh my gosh, I am that vulnerable.
So 8s very frequently will benefit from practices like solitude, meditation, contemplation, things where they have to slow down and address what's actually going on in their interior. Well, they tend to hate it because they're not very good at it.
Yeah.
But if they just embrace it and embrace the fact that, they can't just excel at something the first time they try it.
Yeah.
Or convince themselves that they excel at it, whether they do or not. If they just surrender to the process, it makes them so much better bulldozers. That's the thing with all of these types. We don't want you to stop being who you are. 8s should be 8s. But let's make sure you're bulldozing the right things. Let's make sure that when you tear down this apartment building, there aren't still innocent people inside.
Yeah. It's not time to, no, let's just do it. Well, no, let's not just tear down a building. Let's make sure that we're going through all the appropriate processes first. Let's let the 6 have a say about what might be wrong with just tearing down this building before we do it.
Because 8s accomplish a lot in the world.
Oh, yeah.
but they often don't recognize, especially if they're unhealthy, they tend to not recognize the wake of destruction left behind them.
Yeah. And it's not that they don't care. It's that
they really don't see it.
They really don't see it.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's things that each type edits into their reality and things that they edit out. And 8s can really be very caring. It doesn't typically show up like we're used to seeing it in others, but they really are very caring people, and they care very deeply about a lot of things, but they don't see how they hurt other people.
I have this friend who is an 8.
Okay.
And the stereotype of 8s is that they're, bulldozers. They're mechanical. They're destruction machines, right? That's the stereotype that the rest of us often have of them.
Yeah.
But that doesn't describe what's going on internally with them. It doesn't describe their motivations. So I like to share this story because it helps reveal what goes on internally for some 8s. So I've had this stuff to do around my house for a while, and it's been piling up, and I get irritated by it, and then there ends up being enough of it that I don't even want to mess with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just stuff to do around the house because I don't enjoy it. And so I mention something to this 8 friend of mine, and I just say, yeah, I need to be doing this, but I haven't been doing it. And he says, okay, well, when are you free? I'll just come by the house and I'll kind of take charge and we'll just get it done. And I said, well, that feels really weird to me. I don't want to put this on you. And he's like, no, man, don't worry about it. And he shows up, doesn't think twice. And he is a marshal, man. He shows up and he literally takes over the situation in my own house. And he doesn't think twice about it. And this guy's like maybe 10 years younger than me, right?
Yeah.
So the age difference is incredible, and the maturity is so different, but he doesn't think twice about taking over my situation and running it his way. And in this situation, it's totally appropriate because that's absolutely what I needed. And then I was
and you
fine
gave
with
permission.
It. Yeah, I gave him permission. Please do. I hate this, and you helped me organize it in a way that I'm not good at organizing it.
Yeah.
And we get so much done in such a short amount of time. I'm a more efficient person when you're here playing this role with me. So great, do it. But all of that for him is driven by genuine compassion.
Yeah.
He knows that he can insert himself into someone else's life, take charge, and make things right.
Yeah.
And that's such a powerful thing. And it's motivated by the most noble of intentions.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if he's wrong in his sense of whether or not it's appropriate to insert himself into someone's life, then it's very destructive.
Yeah. Yeah.
He has to wait for permission. He has to respect other people's space. He has to learn all these other things.
Yeah. It's tough.
Yeah.
Another effect of 8s and their fear of vulnerability is that they can't go about making relationships the way other people do. For all of us all of us non-8s, getting to know someone involves some amount of vulnerability.
Yeah.
But 8s can't do that. And so they actually substitute vulnerability for conflict.
Right.
And so instead of sitting down and getting to know someone in the normal way, what they'll do is they'll sit down and insult you. Or they'll sit down at the dinner table and like throw a grenade into the room by asking some controversial question and just sitting back to see how people react to it. They actually like the feeling of conflict.
Yeah.
That's how they get to know people. And so they like to trade punches. And what they need from you is if they punch you somehow, they want you to punch back. Don't just shrivel up and say, ow, that hurt. They want you to punch back so that they know that you're like a solid person.
They need to know that they can be safe with you.
Yeah.
Which means they need to know that if they push you, you can push back.
Yeah.
If they push and you fall over, they can't be safe with you because they will injure you, and they don't want to injure people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think one of the
Absolutely.
most beautiful images of this friendship through conflict thing for me comes from, of all places, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Right?
Okay.
Because Gilgamesh is the classic 8.
Okay.
He's almost, well, he's superhuman, and he's the king, and he rules with an iron fist, but his personality is so overwhelming that he imposes himself too much on the people. They just can't handle how overbearing he is. So the people pray to the gods, please send someone to distract him from us, right? And so they do. The gods send Enkidu, who shows up, and he's like this beastly, animalistic version of a man, right? So Gilgamesh is the civilized, but still very potent, overly masculine figure. But Enkidu is the more uncivilized, untamed energy, whatever. But Enkidu sets out. He hears about Gilgamesh, and he's like, I'm going to take that dude down. So he shows up. They have this epic conflict, man on man. They're fighting it out, and everyone is amazed by this conflict because they've never seen such intense fighting, and neither of them is winning out over the other. And so they fight each other so expertly that eventually they realize neither of them can win out over the other. They're exhausted, and they become friends forever. Right? And it's beautiful. I can totally relate to that. If someone were to try that with me, I would wall them out of my life entirely.
Yeah, exactly.
But if they caught me in 8 space and only engaged, well, I'm using language that we haven't introduced yet, but sometimes 5s that act like 8s.
Yeah.
And if they caught me in that time, I would love it. And also, when we're done, please stop.
Yeah.
I need you to go away.
Yeah. Now I've really used up all my energy, and it's time for me to be alone. Well, that's a fantastic story.
I love it. It's one of my favorites.
Is there anything else we need to say about 8s?
There is so much to say about 8s, but we'll be coming back to all of these types in later episodes. So we can move on.
We're good.
Let's talk about the 9.
The 9. The 9 also in the body type, and like I said, these types, reality seems to just come at them in waves. And if the 8 sees reality coming at them as if it were just a massive wave, they believe they can actually wrestle the tsunami back into the ocean. The 9 is the exact opposite. They feel reality coming at them in waves and feel it blow by blow, and so they're just trying to find a quiet way of being where they can just relax and not have to deal with all of this reality coming at them. I'm now using my NPR voice because that just feels very 9 to me.
It is.
Yeah.
NPR
just
is
need it quiet.
So 9.
Yeah.
Because 9s are very sensitive to power struggles going on around them.
Yeah.
They're very sensitive to conflict. And even if they think one side is right, they just don't like the conflict. They want the conflict to be done and over with.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so they want to be connected with all the people, regardless of which side. For instance, if you're in a group and there's conflict and there are obviously 2 sides, both sides will think the 9 is on their side.
Yeah, because the 9...
But the 9 doesn't want to be on any side.
Yeah, but they can understand both sides better than anybody else.
Which makes them great mediators.
Oh, yeah,
if they will do it. If they will do it.
If they will do it. 9s actually have the lowest amount of energy of any type. 5s feel super low energy, but 9s actually do have the lowest amount. And so 9s like to kind of just numb themselves. And so they're always trying to relax, it seems like. 9s probably nap more than any other type.
Yes.
They are the most likely to end up binge watching something on Netflix and just spending a whole afternoon doing that instead of what they should be doing, because they're just trying to relax, just trying to quiet everything down.
And it's a bit of a stereotype, but it's not entirely wrong that 9s have a very soft way of speaking, a very low affect.
Yeah.
9s don't want to make waves. There are too many waves in the world around them anyway.
Yeah.
So they don't want to make waves. In fact, if they can suck waves out of the world to make the world a calmer place, they will do that.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways they'll do that is by having a voice that isn't very imposing, but also a physical presence that isn't very imposing.
Yeah.
You tend to see it more with women in our society than men, but actually withdrawing their bodies somewhat.
Yeah.
9s will frequently do that. Other types might as well, but it's something you'll see from 9s. The whole idea of passing through the world without leaving a trace is a potent idea for 9s, but not even so much that, because a healthy 9 will not just not make waves. A healthy 9 wants to engage the world in such a way to minimize strife and suffering and conflict.
Yeah.
They really want to make a difference in that way.
They take that internal battle of trying to quiet everything down and make it an external battle.
Yeah.
And say, it's not just that I need to quiet everything down with me. I actually need to go out and quiet everything else down, find ways to minimize strife out in the world. Yeah, you're
and so what begins as a lot of inner conflict for them, a lot of inner struggle, ends up being this tremendous gift of peace.
Yeah, yeah.
Nines are peaceful people. Well, they're often called peacemakers, right?
Yeah.
When they're unhealthy, they are usually not peacemakers, but just conflict avoiders.
Yeah.
But when they're healthy, absolutely they are peacemakers.
There is something about, like I said earlier, nines, when there is a conflict, they understand both sides of any argument. And that comes from the fact that they typically do understand everyone around them and can almost, better than any other type, step into anyone's shoes and understand what it's like to be that person. But the price they pay for that is that nines have less of a sense of self than any other type. They have forgotten what it's like to be themselves and know what it's like to be anybody else. And so nines, we call it self-forgetting. They suffer from self-forgetting. They've lost this sense of who they are, what their agenda is, what their desires are, what they want, and will end up just attaching themselves to someone else. So maybe with all the talk of naps and Netflix watching, I've made the nines sound lazy. And that is actually a stereotype of nines, but that's not necessarily true. They can be very productive, but it's most likely that they'll be productive on someone else's project because they've lost a sense of their own agenda.
And even at their most productive, they tend to be very quietly productive.
Yeah.
They will get so much done and you'll miss it.
Yeah.
Because they don't draw attention to themselves. They're kind of beautiful. Also, one of the things about nines, because they tend to be somewhat withdrawing, somewhat soft-spoken and undemanding, they often get the stereotype of being a little boring, at least at first. If you don't know the person, you try to think about who they are, and they're hard to place, they're hard to pin down.
Their
what's the
personality
substance?
just seems kind of fuzzy. It's hard to draw it into focus.
They're kind of foggy, right?
Yeah.
Except also, once you get to know them, they usually have amazing senses of humor.
Yeah.
They're so much fun to be around.
The way I talk about that instead of boring is oftentimes nines don't leave a strong first impression upon you.
Yes.
You walk away and you're just kind of like, I'm not sure I really have a sense of who that guy is. Mm-hmm. But like you said, once you get to know them, they're terrific. And I particularly love nines. My dad's a 9. And I think a really healthy 9. And so I've seen the real potential for nines more than anyone else I know anywhere. My dad makes people feel comfortable in his presence. Like within 5 minutes of knowing my dad, people love him because he makes them feel so good. And that's like a gift of the 9 where like because they are drawing out all of this negative energy and trying to minimize it, just being in their presence, oftentimes you just feel just more comfortable. You feel, you know that feeling when you're listening to something really good and calming on NPR? That's what a 9 does. You just feel better. So much nicer. Wouldn't you agree, Steve?
I would agree.
Yeah.
So I find personally that I will often connect very easily on a deep level with 9s because as a 5, I'm a 5 that is not afraid of conflict. And especially when 5s move into their 8 space, we tend to be kind of, we'll go after conflict. That's not a problem. But we tend to hate drama. We don't like drama. And drama and conflict are different things.
Yeah.
The way a 9 will avoid and then try to subvert conflict in the world around them, 5s, I think I'm a good example of this, will tend to avoid and if possible subvert drama in the world around us.
Yeah.
Like that just doesn't need to be there. It's costly. It's disruptive. And so to the extent that drama and conflict overlap quite a bit, 5s and 9s can often be found on the periphery of all the noisy stuff going on in the world.
Yeah.
And they're murmuring to each other. They don't really need to be doing that, do they?
Yeah. 9s and 5s meet in the corners of the party, right? Out on the fringe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what we're doing is so much better than what they're doing.
This is so much better. Yeah, but we find ourselves out there for different reasons.
Yeah.
And that's so much of what the Enneagram is about. Is it's not about behaviors. Both 5s and 9s seek the corners at a party, but they do it for different reasons. And so trying to move beyond behavior to motivations is essential when you're using the Enneagram as a tool. Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I can't type you, all I can do is suggest possible reasons why, possible motivations behind the behaviors you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then you tell me which ones are right.
I mean, I think this would almost be a fun game. I bet we could find a behavior that is explainable for all 9 Enneagram types.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure
for different motivations. I think that'd be kind of a
that'd
fun
be a fun
game.
experiment. We should do that.
The fact that we think this is a fun game reveals how 5 we are. We're super duper crazy 5.
It reveals our strength in that we are great with systems and rubrics and
the theoretical.
Yeah, we're great with abstract things. We really want to understand the world around us, and we put a lot of passion into that. And it reveals our weakness. We're more likely to fall in love with the system and make it impersonal. And that's one reason why we've arranged this podcast the way we have. We want it to be so incarnational, despite our weaknesses.
Yep.
Well, that's the 9.
That is the 9. I love 9s.
Yeah, 9s are great.
I remember early on, as you and I were learning this, we would tend to disparage 9s and just like, 9s, I don't know if I can get behind 9s. They're so boring. And we'd say things like that. But as we have learned more and matured in our views of the Enneagram, I think we've realized, first of all, there's something really beautiful about each number.
Yep.
And we've met enough people of numbers that we thought we wouldn't get along with. That's a stupid thing to even have ever said is, boy, I just don't think I'd ever get along with insert whatever number. There might be numbers you struggle with more than others as a pattern, but we used to think that like, 1s. One of our best friends, we found out, is a 1, and so now we love 1s. I found out my dad is a 9. Good gosh golly, I love 9s now.
At first, I would say, I really can't stand 1s. You're not like other 1s.
Yeah.
But that's dumb, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's never true. Because the thing, when you...
No 1s are like other 1s.
Yeah.
Everyone's different.
When you understand the Enneagram well, what you're understanding is not people, you're understanding dysfunction.
Yeah.
And if you interpret people through their dysfunction, you're limiting them to what their dysfunction is. And the fact is that you listening are not your dysfunction. Yeah. The Enneagram will help you discover your dysfunction and how it works and how it imposes itself on you and how it disrupts your behavior and prevents you from living your life well, but that is not who you are. And so when I say something like, 4s irritate the crap out of me, no. 4 style dysfunction is something I personally have a hard time with because it reveals a lot about my dysfunction.
Yeah.
But if we're living outside of our dysfunction and I'm a person and a 4 is a person, we're going to get along just fine.
Yeah.
Because people are not their types. That's one of those fundamental things. So we talk a lot about us being 5s, but behind all of that self-deprecating, we're 5s, is really the desire to be more than just 5.
Yeah, and we have to talk about it in order to somehow transcend it and move beyond it.
Yep.
Which is part of the strategy and the self-deprecation of it.
Exactly.
We're actually trying to realize how ridiculous it is, how totally out of balance we've become in certain ways. And the more we talk about it and reveal it and expose it, the less power it has over us.
Yes.
And this is something that I think you'll find will become a theme on this show as we talk with people about their types and try and reveal how ridiculously out of whack and silly their dysfunction is too.
So let's reveal how ridiculously silly and out of whack 1s are.
Which should not be hard.
They probably don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
They'll probably get mad if you tell them.
Yeah. Let's start where we've started on a few others. What is it that 1s see when they look out into the world? How would you describe that?
1s see how things are not the way they should be.
Yeah.
1s see this is not right. This is not good. And it's not okay that things aren't as good as they should be. You could use the word justice for that, but it's not exactly justice. It's more about order and orderliness. Yeah. There's a way things should go, and things aren't going that way. And that's not good for people.
1s, when they look out into the world, they have a sense of how things could and should be perfect. And up against that backdrop, they see how everything isn't perfect, how everything isn't the way it should be. They see how everything falls short. Now, typically it's not like every single thing. Most ones have like 2 or 3 major areas of focus, but that kind of consumes their thinking of things that they're just not good enough. They should be better and they aren't. And so it leads them to this very black and white kind of world where they see the way things should be and the way things aren't what they should be. And there's like no in-between area. Like even if something is getting better, it's still not where it should be. It's still in that black, not in the white. And they don't have these grays of degrees of better or worse. It's right and wrong.
If you have someone close to you who gets angry about the way you do something when it doesn't affect them at all.
Yeah.
It only affects you.
Except it does affect them.
It does, and that's the thing.
That's the thing, and we don't realize it.
Yeah. Like the order that I take the dishes out of the dishwasher shouldn't affect you at all. I have to deal with the consequences of that. Except they're so annoyed that I'm making it harder for myself. If I would just do it their way, it would be easier for me.
Yeah.
And so, again, there's this kind of empathy and compassion behind it, but it's absolutely anger-driven.
Each type has its kind of core fear and then what we call a core passion. Some people call it a core sin, but I don't like that language. It's passion as in it's their point of suffering. It's also the other definition for passion would be, the way we use that word is like a fixation. I'm very passionate about something. And so their core passion is typically described as anger, but it's not like an outright anger. It's this simmering frustration and annoyance that's just, it's held down. So it's not this explosive anger. It's this simmering resentment.
It's not like they have rage problems or it's out of control.
Yeah.
But if the right thing happens that taps in with their particular frustrations with the world and their sense of disorderliness and injustice, then you can definitely see a lot of those energies come out. And it doesn't mean they handle it improperly. You can be extraordinarily angry and handle everything really well. And many ones will do just that. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that anger isn't always there, and it's not always a motivator in decisions that are being made and the way things are being interpreted. That's one of the things that's so strange about a 1 is because very frequently they're directing behavior that looks like anger at people, and what's going on for them is actually compassion. I'm trying to do something good for you. I'm trying to be compassionate for you, and yet what's coming across to you is that I'm irritated with you, that I'm angry with you, I'm not having patience for you, which is why they say very frequently the thing that ones will need to learn, especially if they want to have peace with other people around them, is to accept that they're only part way into a process. That people are learning and growing just like they are, and perfection is too much to expect.
And part of the reason this is hard for 9s to understand is because as obsessed as they are about the outside world and the order that it should be and how everything is falling short, they are several times harder on themselves.
Yes.
And they cannot escape this inner voice. They call it the inner critic. It's a judge that's always in session, this voice in their mind that is constantly telling them how they have fallen short and how they are falling short. In everything that they do, before you could ever come up to a 1 and give them the slightest criticism on something that they've done, they've already gone over it 5 or 6 times in their mind. And so in much as they see everything around them as it should be perfect and it's not, they see themselves in exactly that same way to a much stronger degree. I should be perfect, and I'm not. And so they have very little room to allow themselves growth. Because like I said, the thing that they are measuring themselves against is perfection. And so who cares if they grew an inch or 2 toward that? They're still not there.
So the dysfunction of a 1 is pretty clear. We've really talked about that. But also, 1s have some pretty profound gifts.
Oh, yeah.
Because 1s tend to advocate for people very well. They're great advocates for justice causes. They tend to be great teachers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, 1s will actually tend to take on like a teaching stance in just normal conversation.
Yeah.
Each type has a way of conversation that they tend towards, and that's the ones. They tend to teach or preach.
They have an innate sense of having something to offer people around them for their own good.
Yeah.
And of course, the task is to make sure that it is something good that they're offering, that it's accurate, and that it's being offered in a way that is palatable and receivable. But if you can do those things, then you're a great teacher.
Yeah, they're also very trustworthy, very high moral standards typically. I mean, they do. You're right. They have very, very much to offer.
Do we have more about one?
No, I don't think so.
In that case, we've completed the gut center.
Oh, yeah.
And we can move on to the heart center.
2 centers down. Centers down.
The heart center, I mean, we know this pretty well in the abstract, and we know it through having many conversations with people who dwell in that space.
Yeah, but this center is the one that's probably most foreign to you and I.
On a personal level, yeah. This is something that we approach better through other people, maybe.
Yeah, which is part of the point of this podcast.
Yeah. So eventually we'll get to the 4, which we'd both call our wing most likely. Mm-hmm. And so we get to talk about the whole 5-4 connection a bit there. Yes. But we start by talking about the 2. Uh-huh. The 2 will be our entry into the heart space. And 2s are fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
Of all the types, 2s I think are lovely and beautiful and intimidating and scary.
Boy, it's hard to think of a better friend than a healthy 2.
Mm-hmm.
It's
because
hard to think.
They will take care of you.
I don't know, as I'm saying this, if I really believe it, but boy, is it hard to think of a worse friend than a really unhealthy 2? That might be too much. Well, but boy, an unhealthy 2, yeah, you're right. I find them actually scary. An unhealthy 5 will do a lot of damage to themselves. Mm-hmm. An unhealthy 2 has the potential to do a lot of damage to other people. And that's what one of the things that strikes me out about 2. We should probably explain that more because that...
Because what's going on with the 2 is 2s are very aware of the needs of those around them.
Yeah.
And they put all of their energy into meeting the needs of other people. And they tend to not put much energy or even attention into their own needs. They tend to be very out of touch with their own needs.
Yeah.
And there's an assumption that as a 2, if I am spending myself on the needs of others, then somebody had better be taking care of my needs also. I need you to take care of my needs because I'm not spending anything on my own.
Yeah, except that's the part of their game that they tend to hide from themselves. And so
they're not consciously aware of that.
Most 2s see themselves as very charitable, altruistic characters. I'm happy to help.
Yep.
Whatever you need, I'm here for that. Mm-hmm. And then on an unconscious level, they're waiting for you to come back around and give them something, but they will never ask for it.
Never ask.
And they're not even sure what it is that they need back from you.
Yep.
And so it's a very dangerous game. And there's a lot of manipulation involved. And 2s don't see themselves as manipulative people until they discover, maybe not until they discover the Enneagram. There's other ways to come to self-awareness. But they say that when a 2 learns their type, it's maybe hardest on them right up front because they see how manipulative they've been this whole time.
Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily intend it.
Yeah, not at all.
There are a lot of really negative stereotypes of the unhealthy 2. And also they tend to center around women. Partly because historically our society has pushed women toward 2 kind of roles.
Yeah. Steve and I have both come from evangelical Christian contexts. And while we don't locate ourselves there anymore, we've recognized that context in particular, not alone, but that context in particular tries to force women into 2 roles.
Yes, be servants.
Yeah,
and care for people.
Yeah, help out in the nursery.
Meet the needs of others. Yes, And so, first of all, there's plenty of resentment about that anyway.
Yeah.
But then let's say you are a 2 and you live into that. And then someone takes advantage of your kindness. Mm-hmm. Someone is not appreciative of the fact that you are pouring yourself into them, particularly if you're an unhealthy 2. Then the response can be quite volatile and can be quite nasty. That the worst thing you could do to a 2 is to take from them, give nothing in return, and show no appreciation.
Yeah.
And honestly, they don't usually even need much in return. If you do as much as acknowledge them, then you have given some kind of reward or appreciation for what they've done. But if you spurn them, then it's like setting a light to a tinderbox. And so we have all these negative stereotypes of like the angry mother, like, oh, all I ever do is take care of you and you won't do this for me. Or don't worry about your mom. Or we have these stereotypes of the jilted female lover, right?
Yeah.
Like hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, right?
Yeah.
We're doing there is mocking the dark side of 2 energy and putting that on women in general.
Yeah.
So we do have a lot, and I mean, I've only mentioned 2, but there are so many of these negative stereotypes about people who will give, but there's a dark side to their giving.
But that's
really unhealthy.
Yeah, that's a very 2 thing.
But there is something to it in the sense that, well, what helps to illuminate why this is a pattern is there's a phrase that goes around for 2s. My coffee is in your cup. Mm-hmm. That if I need more coffee, if I were a 2, I'm actually unlikely to pour myself coffee. I'm going to pour you coffee, and then maybe I get some coffee out of it.
Yeah.
I used to have a roommate who was a 2. And I didn't know it at the time, but this is one of the moments that helped me realize some of these patterns. Every day when I would get home from work, he would be right there. And he would ask me how my day was. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be asked how my day was. I want to be left alone. I had an especially stressful job. I really wanted to castle up at the time. Leave me alone. I need to recharge. And he's right there. How are you doing? Making really great eye contact, caring. And I would be so unnerved by it. And then one day I realized, oh, wait, he wants to tell me how his day is.
Yeah.
He's asking me because he doesn't feel like he has permission to just say, hey, I need to talk about my day. He's hoping that I'll be a reasonable and kind person. And when he says, how was your day? I'll say, oh, it was okay. How was yours? And then he has permission.
Yeah.
But I never gave him permission.
And this is a pattern for 2s where they are so in touch with your needs that they become out of touch with their own. And even if they're in touch, they still don't feel like they have permission to ask you to do anything for them. They are the self-sacrificing, no, I'll take care of it. I put myself aside. I'll do anything for you. Don't you bother doing anything for me type. And yeah, I mean, the extreme version of that, or the kind of ridiculous version of that, is if a 2 wants a cup of coffee, what they're going to do is ask you if you would like them to make a pot of coffee for you, because they can't just go make a pot for themselves. That would be...
And of course, the healthier a 2 is, the more likely they are to recognize that they have needs and it's okay to meet their needs, and to let other people take care of them too. Because 2s frequently feel judged for how well they are taking care of other people.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of judgment in that. How hospitable am I being?
Yeah.
Am I being good enough? There are certain phrases that get attached to these feelings, these needs that we have.
Yeah.
And one of those phrases for 2s is frequently, am I good enough? Am I acceptable? And that's not a bad thing to want. To want to be good and be perceived as good, that's fine.
To be self-giving.
But
I think a moment ago I said that 2s are self-serving, and I meant self-sacrificing. But to be self-sacrificing is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But when it's when there's that underlying and oftentimes unconscious game of I'm only giving to get love back.
Yeah.
Well, what's most unhealthy about that is that that's just not a healthy way to go about love. It also means that if they love you by giving, but won't receive anything, that means their love is the only love worth receiving, because they won't receive love back from you.
Yeah.
And that's why 2s, the passion associated with them is pride. There is this pride in that, no, I'm big enough to hold any challenge, to take on any challenge, and I'm big enough to give and give and give and never receive, except that subconsciously I am trying to receive. And that, no, I don't need your love. You need mine. My love is the important love.
Yeah.
But all of that is buried under the surface.
Yeah. There can end up being something condescending in it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I knew this 2 who was a very, very unhealthy 2. And so I have to be careful because this person is one of the images that will come to my mind first when I think of 2s.
Mm-hmm.
And that's dangerous because she's
It's a distorted version.
Yeah, she's a very, very unhealthy version. But, she's born and raised in evangelical Christianity and is still there. And she will compete in humility with you, right? And she finds this pride in being the most humble person in the room.
Yeah.
And it's gross. It's so gross. I get it. But,
I think we've all had times when like that was an impulse of ours. It's just that the 2 is maybe a little extra drawn to that impulse.
Yeah, they get pulled into it easier, even if they don't want to be.
Yeah. Because we all have
and
certain impulses that are stronger for us than others.
And we can all get pretty gross in our own way, right?
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Definitely.
So
remember, that's why we started with the 5.
Don't take this personally.
We wanted to share our grossness first, so you understood that we weren't singling anybody out.
We're going to be sharing episodes and episodes of our grossness.
Yeah.
We'll try to minimize that, but
there's only so much we can do.
This whole thing is supposed to be vulnerable, and so
So you'll probably get a lot of our grossness. Is there any type so far that we've gone too easy on where we need to go ahead and revisit how disgusting, gross, terrible people they can be? Or just save that for other episodes?
Well, the types we have yet to talk about are 3s and 4s, and they're the grossest.
There's plenty of grossness there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good. I'm excited to talk about the grossness of 3s and 4s, starting with the 3. 3s are chameleons. What they say about 3s is, and I've had several 3s confirm this for me, they can walk into a room and they know instantly who they need to be for that room to project a sense of competency and successfulness. And they immediately just become that person. They just, they morph into whatever that room needs them to be, and you believe every bit of it.
Yep.
Every bit of it.
For the rest of us, especially for like 4s and 5s who have this obsession with figuring out who we are and how to be real and what authenticity is, for those of us who tend to obsess about that kind of thing, the fact that 3s can do that, it seems kind of artificial. It seems like, who are they really? Like, I've seen you with a whole series of masks on, but who is behind the mask? That'll tend to be our approach. But no, a chameleon doesn't have a default, like, this is me. They are something that is flexible and changeable.
Yeah.
That's who they are.
But at the same time, that's also what will sometimes vex 3s about themselves.
Yes.
Is they realize I'm putting on all these masks.
Yep.
And get out of touch with who they are behind all that.
Yes.
And so when a 3 starts moving into even basic self-awareness, that strikes them. However, the 3 game is probably the most successful game of any of them.
Because their game is success.
Their game is success, and they are good at it, and they can put off doing this inner work longer than probably almost any other type, where after a while, as we've described these different games, after a while you get tired of your game and you're realizing it's not working, it's breaking down, it's not giving you the kind of security and comfort that you invented the game for. The 3 game actually does kind of work, and it gives them a sense of security and comfort. It's not good security and comfort, it's not healthy, but it sure feels like it's working from inside the game itself.
So one of the classic images that gets associated with a 3, and again, this can be a bit of a stereotype, except it's based in reality, the idea of the very successful politician or businessman who is troubled by thoughts at night when they're trying to sleep. Because once there's no one to please, they don't know who they are anymore, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or that behind closed doors, it turns out that they're hypocrites because this person is like an anti-gay politician, and then it turns out they've been caught having gay sex.
Yeah.
Because
they're projecting an image that makes them seem successful for the crowd.
Yeah.
Who they are associated with, and that's what the 3 does.
Yes.
They associate with their chosen crowd.
It's incredibly powerful, and it makes them very successful. And there does tend to be this dark side associated with it where it's hard for them to find a consistent identity as they flex through all these different situations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's easy for the rest of us to point at that and say that's hypocrisy, because it can be when it's very unhealthy.
Yeah.
But we all can in our own ways. Theirs is a very obvious kind of hypocrisy. But also for them, it's not just hypocrisy. It's having a decentralized personality, a decentralized identity.
Yeah.
And the struggle to find some coherence in that.
Yeah, and I mean that's the kind of thing that's easy to point to and say that's hypocrisy. But we all have our game.
Yeah.
That's their game.
Yeah.
We all have our game.
Exactly.
Like we said, we all have our grossness and garbage that we need to take out. Yeah, that happens to be theirs. It's not any worse than anyone else's.
If you are starting a podcast, let's say, and you need some advice for branding, a 3 is probably who you go to.
I have already talked to my friend who's a 3 about this, because I know that he's the guy to talk to about this.
If you are running for office and you're not a 3, you should probably have a 3 as your campaign manager.
3s, like 8s, get things done. Where an 8 is a bulldozer and will just force their way through it. The 3s are especially adept
They're
at...
likable.
Well, they are likable, but they're also very good. They understand their own goals. They see the obstacles that are in the way to achieving their goals, and they see the ways around those obstacles more clearly than any other type does.
Yep.
They know how to be successful.
Yeah.
Are their goals always what they should be successful in? Not necessarily, but they do know how to achieve their goals and be successful in whatever they aim at. You will rarely find a 3 who is not successful in what they're aiming at.
Which is why you find 3s in political positions all over the place.
Yep.
You find 3s as upper level management in companies.
Yep.
You find 3s at the top of whatever their social ladder is.
Yeah. They're very practical as opposed to abstract. They don't feel the need to deal with, like, who cares how the system works? I know how to maneuver around it in a way that will get me where I want to go. That's what I want.
Yep.
I'm just going to do what's going to work. So they tend to be very practical, very goal-oriented, and they will always look good doing whatever they do.
Yeah.
Not only do they achieve, but they look good while achieving. They always have a style and a swagger about them. Always.
If you look at a social group that is very different than your own, and you wonder, how in the world did those people end up being the leaders of that group? Because it wouldn't seem that they would be attractive leaders by your understanding of it. That may reveal how little you understand how the values of that group work.
Yeah.
Because most likely that person's a 3 and figured out how to make it work in their group.
Yeah.
Which is not going to work in your group. And if that 3 was in your group, they would mold themselves differently.
Yep. I have a friend who's a 3 he's told me about this, where every new kind of like hobby he picks up, he is immediately able to identify like what are the signifiers that show success within this hobby. And so if there's some kind of group around this hobby, he knows like what brands to go out and buy, and he has enough money that he can do this, where he'll go out and buy like the top end stuff, so that when he shows up to whatever event associated with this hobby, he looks like one of the successful ones already. I introduced him to the Enneagram. And only recently has he come back around and said, yeah, I probably started teaching too early, which means that he probably started teaching like the day after I started talking with him about it. But people bought into it when he says it. I joke that 5s are typically extremely competent, but don't know how to show that. 3s know how to show competency even when they aren't.
Yes.
And now he's actually progressed far enough that I would rely on him. And I also know that when he has a question about it, he'll typically text me. And so he's making good decisions. But
a 3 and a 5 partnership, that's pretty strong, man, because you're going to have strong content and strong packaging, and man, that's good stuff.
So you know who you are, but I think I've told you all this already, so sorry, dude.
Speaking of the dichotomy between content and packaging, 4s.
Well, a 4 would hope to have no dichotomy, no separation between the content and the packaging of themselves, because they are obsessed with authenticity.
And yet, despite that, their authenticity is frequently the most constructed of all the authenticities.
Yeah, that's the thing, is because they are so obsessed with it, they feel the need to construct something super authentic and yet hide from themselves the fact that they are actually constructing something authentic. Did that even make sense?
And yet, constructing their authenticity is so authentic for a 4. Like, just admit it and it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. If they ever come around to the point where they say, no, it's okay to construct, that's actually what everyone does.
Yeah.
But they have this sense that, no, it can only be like the most organic thing, almost like they have no hand in it whatsoever. I am whatever I've become, and it just happened.
One of the ways we see this frequently is the way artists will often talk this way. I need for this to be an expression of the inner me.
Yeah.
Rather than I'm making good art.
Yeah.
Because there's often that conflict in art and what art is.
Yeah.
Is art supposed to be aesthetically pleasing or moving in some way? Or does it need to be somehow an expression of the artist?
Yeah.
When, let's be honest, some of the best art I've ever seen or heard, I don't care who created it. Because I don't need your backstory for this to be good.
Yeah.
This connects to me without you. That's pretty good art.
Yeah.
And also, I think that most 4s I know would find that horrible because there is an association with the thing they're creating, whether it's art or, 4s are frequently drawn to the arts, but they can go into other
probably
fields
more
as well.
frequent than any other type they are in the arts.
But in any field, there's such a strong association between their identity and the things they create.
I think 4s think of themselves like writers think of the characters that they create, where when writers, they'll talk about, well, I didn't know the character was going to do that until it happened. That was just right for the character.
If I'm writing characters well enough, then I allow characters to be who they are, and then the narrative has to flow a certain way, and I write according to that. As the one putting words to page, I'm subservient to how the characters will naturally interact with each other and carry these things out, right? Except that you've created those characters, and then you're subservient to the rules you've set up for your characters. So on one hand, yes. On the other hand, this is still you being constructed. And that's totally okay. Because one of the beautiful things about a 4 is that for them, that struggle between authentic expression and constructed identity is so much more revealed and on display than it is for the rest of us. When really, we're all doing exactly that.
Yeah.
And so the 4's gift, because they're the extreme version of the heart end, right? They're the heartiest of the hearts. Because of that, they have this amazing ability to expose what's going on in the heart and put it to canvas or put it to music or put it into text. And they can help us understand our own hearts.
Yeah. And since we are doing this from one extreme to the other, I actually think that the 5 is so heady and knows the headspace so intimately that we can kind of approximate what it is to think like any other character or any other type. We can move around that circle and go, oh, I can kind of approximate what a 7 thinks like and what a 2 thinks like. Until we get to the 4, because the 4 is so much heart and less head. Not in an insulting way. It's not that they aren't intelligent or that they never think, but the headspace is not their space. I think that in the opposite way, the 4 is so understanding of heart space that they can move around and say, I know what it feels like to be a 2. I know what it feels like to be a 9. I know what it feels like to be an 8. Until they get around to the 5. And we tend to vex each other because 5s are all head and no heart.
And we see this play out when we hang out with our friend who's a 4.
Yeah. All the time.
We're close friends and we love and respect each other, but we drive each other crazy sometimes.
Yeah.
We periodically have to stop and have conversations like, all right, let's kind of work through some of this and hit the reset button.
What was going on there?
Yeah.
You reacted in a way that I don't understand what happened there. And we'll kind of have to stop and explain like what was going on in heads and hearts and
as
all the stuff in
frustrating as
between.
it can be, it's wonderful to be such a mystery to each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, no matter how close I become with this friend of ours, I will never understand him.
Yeah, not totally.
Nope.
I think we're getting closer, but it's still always going to be.
Nope. He's always going to be mystery to me, and I will probably always be mystery to him because we've worked through some of the same patterns so many times.
Yeah.
You would think maybe we'd begin to be able to predict it in each other, but no. I have no idea how oppositely he will react to something that I will, or even that he has reacted that way.
Yes. Yeah.
We were both reacting in such internal ways.
So we've said a little bit about it. So what do you see as the superpower of the 4?
The superpower of the 4 is mapping. Like 5s can map the mind for other people. And we can help people work through their mind stuff about as well as anyone else can.
Yeah.
Because we can be very hands-off and let people be safe.
One thing that I found, like if I'm just being really practical, what a 5 can do is if you are having trouble figuring out what you think, you can't sort out your thoughts.
Yeah.
Sit down with a 5 and we will help you sort out your thoughts and reframe your thinking and figure out, we will help you organize your own headspace. 4s can do that for the heart.
Exactly. They map the heart.
They will sit down with you and you're like, I just don't even know what I feel about this. And I'm all confused, and they can help you feel better.
So
like not feel better, but feel in a better way.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's their superpower, right? Which is why so many 4s are drawn to the arts, because we always say that good art is supposed to move us in some way, right?
Yeah.
We don't say good art is supposed to help us think differently.
Yeah.
Even though it can.
And that's because we so oftentimes separate what we consider to be like head and heart when it's really all mixed up.
Yeah.
But you're right. If we want to think differently, we go read a book. If we want to feel differently, we find art.
Exactly.
Is the way we commonly think about it. It's somewhat artificial.
Yeah. I mean, the Venn diagrams overlap an awful lot.
Yeah.
But there's a difference in approach.
Yeah.
As 5s, we're masters of words. And we like mystery because it helps us engage what's beyond words. But I think 4s are masters of expressing things without words even.
Yeah.
How can I give you this exact experience I had or something very near it without telling you about it? Can I not just put it into words and give you the same thing? Which seems like magic to me.
Oh, yeah. So what have we not said about the 4 yet?
Well, we've talked about how certain of these dysfunctions will tend to cause us more problems than others. So I'll just come right out and say I have a 4 wing, but a lot of my trauma and shame, a lot of the stuff I've had to process over the years is all rooted in that 4 stuff for me. And so I've tended to be very negative about my own 4-ness, my own 4 energy. And so I tend to react very poorly to other people when they show 4 kinds of dysfunction.
Yeah.
It's something I tend to have very little patience for. If anything brings out any kind of scorn in me, that will. I know that reveals something more about me than it does them, because I have this scorn for that kind of thing. Yeah. And part of what I'm expressing there is scorn for certain things of that within myself. And so I've had to explore, where did that come from, right? Because I internalized scorn for those things from some other voices in my life. And so it's wonderful to have this language to be able to explore that. So one of the things I'm looking forward to as a part of this podcast is meeting other 4s and having them tell me what it's like to be them.
Yeah.
Which will do several things for me. One, it'll help me out of the stereotype. It'll help me appreciate the humanity of 4s without being fixated on the things I tend to react to. And honestly, I'm hoping it'll be a bit redemptive of my own 4 energies.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Help me find some peace in something that I've loved and hated about myself.
Yeah, yeah.
So if there's anything else to say about 4, that's the thing for me.
I think the only thing about the type itself that maybe definitely needs to be said is because 4s are so obsessed with authenticity, what they struggle with is this sense that they are always constantly misunderstood.
Yeah.
And that sense holds people back and inhibits genuine connection, because they always have this sense that, no, I'm totally misunderstood. No one really gets it. And so that creates a pattern within fours where they kind of push and pull all their relationships. They'll be super, super close, but then they feel like they're too close and know this person doesn't really get me, so they push them away. And then once the person is pushed away, now they feel alone, and then they pull that person back. And they get in this pattern of push and pull relationships constantly, and all rooted in the sense of being misunderstood. That is actually, even that is rooted in a sense of shame and the question of, am I allowed to be loved or not? Should I be loved? And if no one understands me, then they can't really love me. But I'm constantly kind of shifting my definitions of authenticity, so no one can really understand me, so no one can really all this, like there's this whole crazy complex network of patterns going on within the four. I mean, I think it's hard to deal with sometimes as a friend to a four, but boy, I can't imagine what it's like to deal with internally as a four. I think that when you kind of understand the feelings behind it and this doubt of whether they can or should ever be loved.
I'm recognizing some of those patterns, not so much in me in the last few years, but certainly when I was a less healthy version of myself. I think I exhibited a lot of those patterns, a lot of those inner dynamics. And I didn't like that then, and I don't like it now. I don't like that I did it then.
Yeah.
And for a moment, I thought, oh man, what if I become an unhealthy version of me again? And then that's what my internal life is like again? No way. That helped me have so much compassion just in that one moment.
For the fours in our life,
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I feel like periodically just saying, hey, I care about you regardless of this stuff, right? Just periodically say it without context. Because if there's context, then it can be interpreted. With no context, there's no interpretation. You just have to take my words.
You just have to take it, yeah. Finished what is just a bare bones sketch of each thing. I hope that everyone's found the introduction to each type somewhat helpful, both in maybe placing yourself there if you don't know what you are, but also understanding others around you and realizing that there's 9 different ways of being in the world, and they're radically different, really beautiful.
And there are an infinite number of ways of being those 9 ways.
And that's what I'm leading into is I think we want to take the time to get into each of them. But it's important to understand that any of these 9 ways, this is not a tiny little box that we're trying to force people into. There is, like Steve said, an infinite number of ways to be any one of these things. Like I've said earlier, and I don't even remember if we said it in the intro episode or earlier in this episode, but Steve and I can help you understand what it means to be a 3, 6, or a 9, but only you could ever tell us what it means for you to be a 3, 6, or 9, or whatever else. There's plenty of room to play in each of these types. Some of those variations, I think we'll go ahead and briefly mention and how those things play out. We've mentioned a few times already the idea of wings. You've said you have a 4 wing. I think I probably have a 4 wing as well. Describe to me wings, Steve.
Wings are sort of like prevenient grace. It gives us some foothold outside of our dominant dysfunction. As we're kind of artificially restricting ourselves to these certain energies, this way of being with the world, we don't tend to wall up entirely in one space where this is the only thing I can do. Because if that were the case, most of us wouldn't be able to function in life.
Yeah.
We usually, really early in life, tend to at least branch out to one of the areas right beside us.
Yeah.
So as a 5, that'll probably be a 4 or a 6.
Yeah.
If you're a 9, early on, you'll probably develop some 8 energy or some 1 energy.
Yeah.
You usually go one way or the other, and you usually develop that pretty early in life. Late teens, early 20s, you're really fleshing out what that wing is like, and that helps you get along in situations where your primary energy just doesn't work.
Yeah.
If I could never engage heart energy, or as a 6, respect authority, right? Because 5s don't tend to a whole lot.
Yeah.
If I couldn't do either one of those things, it would be very difficult for me to navigate life.
Sure.
And so the numbers beside us have the corrections we need to make our own number healthier. The 4 has lessons that the 5 needs to to learn.
Yeah.
And the 6 has those lessons as well. So early in life, we tend to start getting one set of those lessons pretty well. And then later on in life, if you're doing life well and if you're blessed enough to be able to put energy into these things, you tend to start developing the other wing as well. That tends to be a later in life thing. So maybe you've started to notice those things in yourself. Maybe you haven't. But yeah, it's just the numbers right beside you. And that's why the language of wings, right? So like my torso is in the 5, but I have one arm over here in the 4. I can do that occasionally. I'm not nearly as good at doing that as a 4 is, but at least gives me a branch outside myself.
Each type is kind of like a ridiculous, cartoonish character of a person, right?
Yeah.
Isolated, they're kind of ridiculous. And then the wings help us round ourselves out and balance out the extremes of each type. And like you said, early on, we tend to have one, and you will either naturally develop another as you grow healthy, or you can make that intentional and say, no, I need to take on certain aspects of a 6 that I haven't yet. And I need to figure out how to balance myself out in that direction. One of the other ways that we will all show some variety, even with our own type, is this idea of subtypes.
Subtypes is a very convenient way to talk about it, but a lot of people don't like that language.
Yeah.
But it's convenient language to use. So just know that it's not perfect language. There are different ways of being these 9 types. Some people will talk about 27 types. So, you go from 3 centers, the head, heart, gut center, and 3 different ways of being in each of those. So you get 9. And then there are 3 different ways of being those, and you get 27. And so there's something that makes sense in all of this. There's something kind of beautiful and predictable in it. But what we're talking about is the technical language they use is instinctual stacking. It's just whether you're better at engaging life on your own, or in one-on-one situations, or with groups of people. So we will tend to call those self-preservation. And I'm a self-preservation 5, right? So I doubled down on all of the isolation and solitude stuff that 5s do.
The self-preservation instinct is associated with the head.
One-on-one type.
And then what's oftentimes called the sexual or the one-on-one pairing instinct is associated with the body. And then the social is associated with the heart.
Right.
Yeah, we're coming back around to that head, body, heart triad, but now it's on a smaller level. Yeah, on a smaller level, the level of each individual type. And so the way I kind of tend to talk about it is, even though I'm in the head triad, I still have all 3 instincts. I still have the head, the gut, and the heart instincts. And my type gets filtered through one of those instinctual drives. It kind of shapes my type in a way that's different from if it was filtered through one of the other 2. So I'm a social 5, and so my 5-ness is
a bit more hearty.
Is a bit more hearty.
But also you tend, on a very practical level, you tend to navigate social situations in a better way than I do, in a better way than a lot of 5s do. Not that you're like a social butterfly, but compared to 5s.
And compared to most 5s, maybe I am.
And so one of the reasons why they call it instinctual stacking is because all 3 of those are there.
Yeah.
And you usually name yourself according to whichever one's on top.
Yeah.
That's the one you're really good at. And if you can get away with it, that's where you'll stay.
And then there's other situations where you might slide into the second.
You have a second one that
most
you can kind of do.
Yeah, most of the time the third.
That's your blind spot.
Is your blind spot.
You're usually real bad at that.
Mostly inaccessible.
Yeah.
I would say I'm a social 5 with a 4 wing or something like that.
And so if social were at the bottom for me, that would be my blind spot, whereas you're pretty good at it, vice versa. And so even though we're both 5s, and we both think we have 4 wings, we manifest that stuff in such different ways.
Sure.
And of course, our diversity extends far beyond that. But that gets us going, exploring how we're the same thing in different ways, which is one of the useful things about this.
I know a lot of 5s, and I think you do too.
We tend to find each other.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me is about how different all of us are. The more of you meet of any one type, the less you're going to be able to rest on stereotypes.
Yep. Speaking of stereotypes, and this is just a brief note, we don't really need to go into it, but health and unhealth is really important here. Because, because the less healthy you are, the more of a stereotype you become.
Absolutely.
The more cartoonish you become, the less human you are, right?
Yeah,
So-
it's actually easier to type people
Yeah.
who are unhealthy because it's
Because we're
always
typing-
easier to see the dysfunctions.
because we're typing their dysfunction, right?
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
that's one of the weird things about the Enneagram, and one of the things that is kind of unpleasant when you're introducing people to it is I'm going to try to poke you in the places that hurt you the most. That's what we're looking for. Where does it really hurt?
Yeah.
Now we're on to something.
Yeah. If you've ever listened to someone talk about the types like we just did, and there was one that they talked about, and you felt hurt or bruised or cringed at it, that's probably your type.
Yep. And one of the reasons why going over this with people who know what they're talking about is such a big deal, why that's so important, rather than like doing tests or things, even though they can be helpful, is that so often the way these dysfunctions work, you can be very unaware of your own dysfunction. And so it's hard to type yourself. It's hard to, just using the information, discover what hurts the most, where the unhealth is, because it's what we're avoiding. It's the thing we're trying to not think about and trying not to experience, and the thing we're trying to not live into.
Except that from the background, it's the thing that's actually driving
It's
so much of
dominating
what we
things.
do.
Exactly. And that's the thing. If you don't face it, it's in charge.
Yeah, it has to be brought to the foreground.
Yep.
So that it can, bringing it to the foreground is actually what weakens it.
So, yeah, find your unhealth, because it's there. Yeah,
Steve, we've talked about a lot.
we have.
I think we've talked about enough. Hopefully,
Oh,
this
goodness.
whirlwind tour of the Enneagram has been helpful to those of you who are listening. Thank you again for listening to us.
If you are still listening at this point, you must be pretty awesome. Or bored.
You're something.
You are something.
But I have good news. In the next episode and every episode following that, there will be someone with us who's doing some of the talking. And so you'll have much less of us, much more of them. And so there's something to be excited about there. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah.
I'm ready to move on with this journey and learn more about other people, the Enneagram, and see what kind of beauty it can introduce into their lives. What kind of beauty it can help reveal within them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I would think I'm most excited about.
I'm excited to see how this might matter to people in different ways.
Yeah.
Because when you start sharing it, you never know what it's going to unlock.
Yeah.
You never know what it's going to reveal in them. And honestly, I'm excited to get to know some old friends better.
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear people's stories, have them reveal to us what's going on with them, because stories are our identities. Stories are where the truth is. I didn't sign on to this podcast, Seth, to be a talking head. So
I'm hoping to move away from that much more as well.
So here's to guests from here on out.
Yep.
Thanks for sticking around.
Yeah. Thank you.